Hello, welcome to Walpole United WFC.
Good afternoon and welcome to this brand new show on Walpole United WFC, the weekly wrap-up with me, Gareth Townsend, and I'm joined this afternoon by Matt Crane. Matt, how are you doing?
Yeah, not too bad, thanks, pal. Excited for this, actually. I've been looking forward to this. We've had it planned for a while. It's something, that we enjoy talking about. Obviously, not just Man United, but other clubs as well. We've watched a load of other clubs pre-season as well. So, yeah, should be good, this. And hopefully viewers enjoy it as well.
So just give everybody a quick run-through of the plan for the weekly wrap-up. Every week, coming to you from a Tuesday lunchtime, this 30 to 45-minute show is designed to fit nicely into your lunch break, where I will be, sometimes on my own, sometimes joined by guests, but running through the main talking points from the weekend, from the WSL starting from next week, the Championship, and tiers 3 and 4 from the National League as well. Wanting to kind of focus on the football that is readily available for us via Sky Sports, the FA Player, so on and so forth, but also want to shine a light on some of the more local National League sides that also kind of deserve your attention and support, especially this season with games being on a Friday night and a Saturday night. There's going to be some Sundays with no United games, so can definitely get down and support one of the many, many local non-league sides that are around. This weekend was the very first weekend from the FA Women's Championship. And for me, I think that's going to be one of the most exciting championship seasons that we've potentially ever seen. I think, if you ask people to predict the winners, there would be a wide range of answers. We saw Durham go really close last season. Last season, people expected Liverpool maybe to be a bit better. We've seen teams like London City Lionesses strengthen, Coventry strengthen, and Charlton have turned fully professional. And, there's a whole host of really interesting stories coming out of that division. Matt, what were your sort of early thoughts from this weekend, without going into too many specifics about the games, because we'll get onto those later, but just sort of general thoughts from the weekend?
Yeah, I think, do you know what? I was actually surprised, and I know we're going to obviously go into detail, but I think for me, there's quite a few surprise results I didn't maybe expect. And, like you touched on earlier with team strengthening and sort of some of the signings that have been made, I was fully expecting certain teams to maybe win games this weekend that didn't. So I think for me, and I've said this before, it's probably the most competitive championship season as far as I've known, and I include when it used to be the old WSL2 in that. And I think when the likes of Everton, Yeovil and Bristol were in it, I'd say this is more competitive than back then. So for me, yeah, I was just, shocked at some of the results, some good results, some good games. But yeah, I think overall it's going to be a very interesting season. Obviously, listen, nothing's won in game week 1. Nobody wins the league, nobody gets relegated and things like that. But it was an interesting start to the season for me, and something I will be following closely throughout the season will be sort of the Championship and how people are doing and how individual players are doing. So yeah, looking forward to it. There's a lot of talent in that league. There's a lot of clubs really sort of gone for it in terms of recruitment. So yeah, exciting times ahead for that.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think it's a league where a strong start is really, really key. Really key to success. I think last year we saw Leicester start really strong. The year before, obviously, Villa had a really strong start to the season before the season was curtailed and they came up. And obviously United were really dominant in that season when we were down there. So I think, yeah, the teams that start pretty early on and start strongly are going to be the teams that are going to be up there towards the end. And I think we've seen some players take a step down. Like, there were some players that I thought potentially could have made WSL moves, but have kind of gone, actually, no, and stepped down to the Championship. Jamie Lee Napier is one that springs to mind, sort of straight away from there. So speaking of shock results, let's start our discussion from Prenton Park. Then there's Liverpool, who many people last season thought would be favourites to go up. And again, I think this season, many people have them there or thereabouts as well. But they started their season at home in a 1-0 defeat to a very new-look London City Lionesses team. For me, my thoughts were that it looked in that first half pretty even. I think Missy Bocairns looked a threat. She had a couple of good chances. But I think neither side were really able to take their chances. I think Jamie Lee Napier had a chance from the back post where she probably should have scored but put it wide. And in the end, it was a penalty that won the game for London City. A well-taken penalty, a good penalty, but maybe a little bit soft in terms of it being awarded. What did you think?
I can see why you'd say soft. Yeah, I think it was one of them where it was possibility of it just either being waved away or not given at all. But I think overall, looking at that game, I'm looking at the starting lineup, and I'll be honest, I was quite sort of surprised with some of it. I was expecting people to start that didn't start, and there was you look at the bench, and I think the substitutes yesterday, Rihanna Dean was on the bench, Carla Humphrey, and then obviously experiencing Rhiannon Roberts and Niamh Fahey. So yeah, pretty surprised with the way it went. I think they started Charlotte Wardlaw, who's on loan, started with her, obviously a young player, but she's come in and done okay. But just overall with Liverpool, I was expecting a lot more, to be fair. Talk about Rihanna Dean and Carla Humphrey. For me, you mentioned before about players that could have played WSL. For me, they more than could have played in the WSL this season. So overall, interesting game. But I think, if you sort of look at how the game went overall, in terms of like chances created, I think London City Lionesses more than held their own. And I think, they've been smart in the transfer window. They've got a couple of loans from, WSL clubs, academies. They've got in the likes of, you mentioned Jamie Lee Napier, Charlotte Fleming as well, another capable sort of defensive midfielder or midfielder. So, yeah, I think it was one of them. It's a little bit maybe a cagey affair for me. At times I thought that maybe did both teams possibly hold back, scared not to lose. I think London City Lionesses would have been more than happy with a point, but to come away with 3 points in the opening game of the season, what a confidence boost that must be. And, I think shout out to London City Lionesses defenders as well, because, for me, there was a couple in there that had a very good game. Kenny Thompson was one of them. And Harley Bennett as well. And I believe they also made the team of the week. So I think, from a London City Lionesses point of view and from sort of their manager and their players, they'll be absolutely delighted with that start to the season. And, just hopefully they can build from there. Now, it'll be interesting to see how they do. They've got full-time players as well at the club. So they should be and could be one to watch out for this season.
I think it's interesting that you pick up on the lineups, because that Liverpool lineup, like you say, their new signings starting from the bench, whereas London City tweeted actually after the game that they awarded 10 debuts to new players in that game. So it was very much a side kind of trusting in their side from last season to get them the result, versus another side, putting their faith in some of their new signings to go out and get the result that everybody wanted. I think for me, the interesting thing is, I think people slept on London City over the transfer window. I think a lot of their signings went under the radar. They came in from a good base from last year. They were kind of pretty comfortably in mid-table. They weren't really challenging Leicester or Durham towards the top, but they were never really a threat of relegation, like teams like, say, Coventry were. And then they've strengthened from there. So, naturally, I think that teams like Liverpool, they will be able to be competitive against. I think the question for me is how quickly do they gel, and are they able to go on a long run? But I think, to go away to Liverpool, first game of their season, more or less a brand new squad, 10 debuts, and get the win is a sign of exciting things to come from them. So that was the first game. Second game to talk about is Blackburn beating Sheffield United 2-0. For me, Sheffield United always seem to be the bridesmaids of the Championship. 2 seasons ago, when Villa came up, they kind of pushed them hard all the way. And, Sheffield United versus Villa was a top of the table clash. And a lot of people kind of, especially from United fans' perspective, with Molly Green, Emily Ramsey going on loan there, Nom Hartley obviously playing there as well. Amy Palmer was there at that point. So there was quite a bit of interest from a United fans' perspective. And then last season, I think they made some decent signings, and we thought, could they maybe go again? They lost some players, particularly from Sheffield United, went to Leicester. And we kind of thought, can Sheffield bounce back and do it again? I saw some people saying similar things again this season. Can Sheffield United take these signs they've made and push on one step further? And then they come up against the Blackburn side away from home, and I think they were the better side, particularly early on. They had some of the better chances. I think notably for me, some of the better chances for both sides early on came from corners. Maddie Cusack actually almost scored directly from one. It was kind of hit the bar and tipped over. And I think, if some of those early chances go in for Sheffield United, it's a very, very different game. Did actually take one of the chances. Courtney Sweetman-Kirk got a goal that was assisted by Tara Bourne, who has recently joined them on loan from United, but was ruled out for offside. Not quite sure from the camera angle that I saw whether I think she was offside or if she was just on. I know we kind of had conversations before about the quality of refereeing, so it wouldn't come as a shock to me if she was, level or something. But I think for me, the difference for Blackburn was one player. I think Meg Hornby, who we've just let go, they left United to go there for this season on a free, was the player really that stood out to me. I think she was instrumental in Dixon's goal for Blackburn to take the lead. Although, she didn't get the assist because there was another touch in the box to kind of knock it into Dixon's path. It was her that drove well, got to the byline and put the ball in initially. And she just seems to be a problem down that wing for the entire game. What did you make of that game?
Yeah, again, another one where sort of what's the word? I don't know, the team that on paper looks better didn't win. And I think, that's a credit to Blackburn again. I think, at their ground, anybody that's been, it's a very sort of rough, what I'd call a rough pitch. It can be bobbly, it can be difficult to get your game going on it. But I think what we saw from Blackburn was, a very committed performance. I think, everybody knew the job. They've got a good mixture in there of youth and experience. You talked about Meg Hornby coming in. Ellie Leake is an experienced player. She came in. They're fortunate to get Hannah Cohen back from Everton development team. They've still kept the likes of Natasha Fenton in there, Saffron Jordan as well from years gone by. I think they were two players when I watched them sort of back in the day. You've got Annabelle Blanchard, Chloe Dixon came in from Sheffield. So there's a very good mixture there in terms of what sort of they can offer, and it'd be interesting to see how they do. A lot of people said to me that Blackburn might struggle this year because everybody else seems to have chucked a lot of money at it. But I think for me, if you're hard working and you can get those young players really hungry and firing, on all cylinders, then why not? And I think, from what I saw yesterday, I was, again, organised from Blackburn, very impressed. You look at the Sheffield squad, and again, that's packed with quality. And I'll get onto that in a minute. But I think from a Blackburn point of view, it looked good. And obviously, they were able to hold out and not only win the game, but keep a clean sheet as well, which again, a massive shock. If you look at the two teams on paper, again, I was expecting Sheffield to at least come away with a point. But then, like you touched, Sheffield is sort of there and thereabouts around the top, but they do struggle for that consistency. Obviously, this is game one, but I think, is this going to be another sign of the times for them this season? But yeah, in terms of Sheffield, I mean, again, you look at that squad and he's kept the majority of it together. Obviously, they've added Tara Bourne on loan from ourselves. Charlotte Newsham is also there as well. Some good up-and-coming young players. Lucy Watson was somebody we saw for England under-19s. Rima Lord Mayes, again, is a very good young player. they've added Sophie Bradley-Auckland as well, who, has got bags of experience. So for me, yes, very, very, very interesting. But I just expected a little bit more, maybe in terms of testing the keeper and creating chances from Sheffield. I think Taraborn's shot, was one of very few on target. There was that one. Obviously, you talked about the goal that was ruled out, probably incorrectly. But I think apart from that, I wouldn't have said that Alex Brooks had tons to do. She made a few good saves, don't get me wrong, but I think, from a Sheffield point of view, they need to sort of up how clinical they are in front of goal and maybe, look to create chances in different ways other than just from set plays. But again, it's game one, it's a work in progress. So, and fair play to Blackburn on that result.
Yeah, I think the disappointing thing for me from Sheffield United perspective was the defending. There was a point where Fran Kitchen came out to meet a long ball and just completely missed it. And she was lucky that Sophie Bradley-Auckland's there to clear it off the line. And then for Blackburn's second goal, it was just a long ball from the goalkeeper, no real threat. They allowed to bounce, didn't take it under control quick enough, were dispossessed, and then Hodgson was allowed to score the goal that won the game. And I think, we talk about it all the time. You'd be so disappointed just to concede a goal kick that you've allowed to bounce and then suddenly you're 2-0 down. And, if I was a Sheffield United fan, that would be, for me, the disappointing thing from that game. You can talk about if that Sweet and Kirk goal is allowed, which I think it probably should have been, then it's a different game at that point. But, when you defend like that, then, I think you're inevitably going to concede goals. So it'll be interesting to see how they bounce back next weekend.
I think just quickly on that, what didn't help as well is that with the way Sheffield set up, Tara Bourne seemed to get forward, which was fine, but she was actually playing centre-back. So for me, it seemed they needed to decide, do I want a back three or do I want a back four? And I think what happened when Tara did go forward was they got caught. Now, whether that was the game plan, again, like I say, you need to decide if she's holding, in front of a back three and then one holding, is it a back four? And at times it seemed maybe that was due to the lack of organisation, like you touched on there, with sort of the long balls and nobody really to take charge. Because let's not forget, Tara is very good in the air. She's quite a tall player as well. I just think a lack of leadership at the back, again, maybe causes the confusion.
Yeah, I agree. Move on now then to Durham versus Watford. Interestingly, Durham won this game 2-1. Durham have been a side gradually getting better and better. The 18-19 season came fourth. 19-20 season came third. Last season came second. And I know that a lot of people this year have them to make that final one-place gain and win the title. I'll get on to kind of who we think that's going to be towards the end of the show. But I think that Durham looked really strong here. And I think if anybody finishes above them, then they'll probably end up winning the title. I know that we were at the Coventry game yesterday and spoke to a Sunderland fan who said similar. For me, I think Beth Heppel, looks like she's going to be in with a shout of getting, the Golden Boot, potentially Player of the Season as well. Watford gave the ball away pretty early on. I think Durham should have scored, definitely should have scored more than two. I think Heppel was pretty instrumental in everything that they did well. For their first goal, it was her shot that hit the bar before Briggs was kind of there to tap in the rebound. And then again, speaking of defensive errors, for Heppel's second goal, Watford were just dispossessed, sort of, just outside the box, and then Durham were allowed to sort of press on and get that second goal. But that second goal seemed to spark Watford into life. I think before then, there wasn't really any threat coming from them. They carried on pushing, and it kind of grew after going 2-0 down. Their goal was well taken, but I think it was poor defending from Durham again. Just another route one ball that wasn't dealt with properly. And then once they got that goal, they seemed to build and put a lot of pressure onto Durham. They hit the post late on, and potentially you could say they were unlucky not to grab a point, which I think for them, away for Durham, first game of the season, 12 o'clock kickoff, so it's a long old trek up from London to Durham. Potentially unlucky not to come away from a point. I think they'll probably take that. Watford this year, their targets are not the same as Durham's. Watford's target is not to get relegated. I think there are a few clubs where that is going to be the sole aim. I think that battle for to avoid relegation is going to be just as interesting as the one for promotion. But Watford did eventually show some kind of attacking threat, but they didn't really show an awful lot to really impress me. Now maybe they need some time to grow into the division, and going to Durham, like I say, away on the first game of the season against arguably the title favourites was always going to be a tough ask, and maybe to come away disappointed not to snatch a point is good for them. But for me, Durham were much the better side and looked good value for their win. Probably could have scored 3 or 4 goals. I think if I was in that Durham dugout, the conversation I'll be having with the players this week is, we need to take these chances when we get them, because if they had conceded that late equaliser, then that's very definitely 2 points lost. And like we've said with some other teams, that it's important to start the season well, and push on. So, what were your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I'd agree with what you said. I think similar sort of analysis of that game. Obviously Durham, we know how good they are. We know they've improved year on year. I think Durham would probably be disappointed that it only finished 2-1. I really do. I look at that Durham squad, and obviously they've improved it this year. Ali Johnson came in last year, but this will be her first full season. Lizzie Juppé we saw when we were in the Championship, and she was in double figures for Charlton. Went to London City Lionesses, last year. Didn't quite maybe hit the ground sort of running, but, I think with quality around her now, you've got her, you've got the likes of Bridget Galloway, again, who surprisingly didn't start yesterday. She did come on, but I thought she would have been somebody that would have started having, last season been one of their better players. But then I suppose, again, Ali Johnson, somebody else who didn't start. But it's interesting, I'd be interested to see how Durham do this year, because, listen, we all know they can grind out them wins. They got the win yesterday. You don't have to, be smashing teams every week to win the league. We've seen that as long as you get through them games, and as long as they're winning all the home games and picking up points on the road, they could be there and thereabouts. But yeah, again, from a Watford point of view, fair play. I think they gave a real good go at it. Like you said, their ambitions are probably to stay up. They've made a couple of good signings. Amber Stobbs came in, Flo Fife, who scored, very good player. They've got experience in Helen Ward. Georgia Clifford, the fullback, she's ex-Reading. Again, a young player. She was on the bench yesterday, but I'm pretty sure she'll be, somebody that will be starting games. And obviously Jenna Legg as well, who's not yet fully fit to come into the side as well. So I do think in terms of Watford, they should have enough to sort of hopefully stay up. But again, it's going to be very tight down the bottom, because there are, like we saw yesterday, other teams that have picked up results that you might not have thought. So I think with Watford, it's just about, going and really just trying the best, going for it, playing their game, maybe bringing a bit more experience, whether they do that in January or whether there's freebies still knocking about, I don't know. But I think for them, yeah, not a bad display. Could have nicked a point, like you said, but I'm sure, again, there'll be more to come once they sort of find their feet, because let's not forget, they have come up a league as well. So I think, to go to last season's runners-up as, a newly promoted side and to only lose it 2-1, fair play to them.
Yeah, no, I agree with what you've said. Moving on then, the penultimate fixture of the weekend, Bristol City, on their return to the Championship, went to Crystal Palace and lost 4-3. What did you make of that game?
Do you know what? I think the first thing that springs to mind is entertaining. I did my show last Tuesday, and I had a couple of fans on, no Bristol fans, but I did say to John Foster, he said, "Oh, what do you think of Bristol this year?" I said, "Do you know what? I think they'll struggle. I think, they've chucked a team together, which, I mean, listen, they had quite a few outgoings, so they needed to get players together. But I look at the team and I just think, where are the goals coming from? I think it's one of them where, they've got Simran Jamaat, who came on scored a goal. They've got Melissa Johnson, who seemed to struggle last season, but I can't see for me where goals are coming from. And it's going to be difficult for them. I don't expect them to go up just based on that. I think they can capable of top 2, top 3, absolutely. But for me, I was just surprised with how, I don't know what's the word, unorganized they maybe were, and that's throughout the team as a whole. I think you saw it yesterday, and obviously, like I said, a lot of new players, they need time to bed in, but they have got experienced players there. Satara Murray has played in the WSL before for Liverpool. They kept Amy Palmer, Leah Cataldo, good player, Ava Koiken, again, another good player, Jessie Woolley, good young up and coming player. So there's options there for them, but I think, quite surprised really. Obviously they did come back in the last minute to make it 4-3, but they didn't seem to me to really take the game to Palace as I'd sort of expect, but fair play to Palace. I think again they've recruited quite well. You talk about experience going in there, Charlie Clifford, experience of the championship. Coral Haynes has been there for a while. Again, good player. You look at Millie Farrow, who's gone in there. You've got Bianca Baptiste. You've got Grace Coombs as well. Lee Nichols still there. So yeah, I was quite surprised that Palace scored 4. But then, like I say, having watched it and looked at how sort of run ragged Bristol were, I think Coral Haynes literally ripped them to shreds, didn't she? And yeah, I suppose pleasing for Palace because, that's a result, again, that'll give them confidence going into the new season. They struggled last year. They brought and recruited quite well. And yeah, obviously, home team, they've hung on, they've not capitulated, because I said to you yesterday, didn't I? Don't be surprised if it's 4-4, but, fair play. They've dug in there. They've got the win. And again, could be a team that could well be, sort of 5th, 6th this year. I'd expect mid-table. I think if they come in higher, I'd be surprised. But I expect them to, be improved on last season's positioning.
Yeah, I think I agree more or less with everything you've just said. I think the disorganisation was really clear from both sides. I think, of those 7 goals, at least 3, 4 of them don't get conceded 4 weeks down the line. Conceding a penalty 20 seconds into the season, just any game plan that you've made for that game is just thrown out the window, and you're sort of chasing the game. So, I think in a couple of weeks, Leah doesn't concede that penalty. I also think in a few weeks' time, Morgan in goal for Palace doesn't have the poor distribution that led to the first 2 of Bristol goals. I think, on reflection, she'll be really disappointed to have lost those. She redeemed herself, I think, when they were 4-2 up. There was a really good opportunity and she made a great save. But yeah, it just... I don't think either of these sides really going to be kind of pushing towards the top. Palace, for me, at the start of a month ago, were probably the side that I had pegged to maybe be the one that would go down, either them, Watford or Sunderland, who we'll get onto shortly. But yeah, it just struck me as a side that didn't really know what it was supposed to be doing. And I guess that's to be expected, when any plan you've made for that game and everything you worked on in training is out the window 25 seconds into the game. So, I think Palace will get better, and I think Bristol will get better. I think Palace, they want to look to kind of keep that goal scoring threat. I think if they can score goals like that, then their defensive fragility won't be a massive problem. But these are the types of games that both of these sides are going to want to be winning. You need to beat the teams that are expected to be in and around you. And if Palace are going to want to kind of look to push towards maybe the top half of the table, then they're going to need to grind out results like this, and being able to hold on, I think we've done them wonders. Before we move on to our final game of the week, obviously Charlton were supposed to play Lewis this weekend. There is supposed to be 6 games a week, but there was COVID in the Charlton squad, so that game has been postponed. So I wonder sort of how much postponements are going to play into it. as we move through the season. Hopefully not a great deal. Really don't want games to be being postponed. But at least, teams and players knew, and fans, more importantly, knew sort of a couple of days beforehand that the game was off. I think they on Friday, so any sort of plans, no one sort of travelled and found out then. If we want to our final game then, the game that we went to, I've said previously that I think Coventry are my title favourites. I think their signings this summer have been really, really strong. I think you look at Molly Green taking a drop down from the WSL. I think she's still capable of playing at that level. I think Liv Ferguson, again, could play WSL, and Katie Wilkinson, I think easily could go to a side like Birmingham or Spurs and get goals there. So for me, I think their recruitment this year has been the best of any of the championship clubs. But they lost 1-0. And I think we'll do a little bit of analysis on this shortly, but they seem to control the game, have most of the ball, but their issue seemed to be that they just didn't create any full chances. Neither side really did. And I think the one goal that Sunderland scored was a half chance where Coventry just backed off. They saw that sort of yard of space, had a shot, and it ended up in the back of the net. And then after that, they sort of saw the game out and stuck to the game plan really, really well. But it was disappointing. I thought Coventry were going to have a bit more going forward. There were a lot of debuts on that side. But I just kind of thought that there would be a bit more threatening going forward. You sign the top goal scorer from the previous season. You sign clear attacking threat in Olivia Ferguson, Rio Hardy as well. And you shore up your defence with players like Naomi Hartley, but it just didn't really seem to pay off for them. What do you think went wrong?
Yeah, I think similar to you said. I think the thing is they had a lot of the ball, Coventry, but listen, you can have all the possession in the world. If you're not doing anything with it, it's a waste of time. I listened to what the manager had to say afterwards, and I listened to what Katie Wilkinson said afterwards, and I think maybe, I don't know, would it be fair to say the pressure got to them because maybe they are a lot of people's favourites. I don't know. But, basically what came out of the interviews afterwards, that there was little bits that they were happy with. There's quite a lot they weren't happy with, and they were going to basically have to analyse it and sort of look at what went wrong. I think for me, what went wrong personally was that, they started off with Molly on the bench and they had a winger in central midfield, which... baffled on that. I can't understand why you do that. The defence to me didn't look that bad. I thought, the defenders had a good game. How that Sunderland goal went in, I don't know. Obviously, the ball was given away in midfield, and I think the midfield probably let them down the most out of that game. But, if you look at the replay of the goal, there's so many bodies in the box. How on earth they didn't defend that, I honestly don't know. And that's not just the defender's fault. That's the team in general. There seemed to be a lack of urgency to win the ball back after giving it away. Chances were few and far between. Without, the sort of stats of how many shots and how many on target, they did appear to me to have more shots, Coventry, but not really test the keeper. I think the keeper maybe, for Sunderland made a few saves and that was about it, but nothing of note. And I just think that, some of it, forwards dropping deep, Destiny 2 Saint looked dangerous on the wide, I think it was left first half. They swapped her over, and then the second half was a little bit quieter. But I think for the players in that team, the experience they've got, obviously they are new to each other, and it was something I spoke about at full time. But even some of the originals, I thought Katie Morris had a decent game in midfield. She put herself about a lot, particularly in the second half. But I just think looking at that team, maybe it is a pressure thing, but then I suppose, that for me, barring Molly on the bench, was their strongest 11. So it's not even like, they've mixed last year's team with this year's team. So I do maybe think that, there'll be a lot to think about for them going forward. But in terms of Sunderland, fair play, and I said this yesterday, and I spoke to obviously John Hume afterwards, and he was sort of saying, it's the majority of last year's squad, which I think will probably help them. They worked hard for each other. Everybody knew the job. Kira Ramshaw up top, had a very good game. She was always lively. Emma Kelly, formerly of Birmingham, WSL player, in that midfield again, really helped. And I think the midfield in the end won them the game. And they were just organised. They worked hard for each other. Everybody backed each other up. And you saw it full time like me, how delighted them players were. John said to us, I thought we're going to get absolutely rolled over. They've proved him otherwise. They've proved that, actually when the going gets tough, and it's backs to the wall, that they can really fight and scrap for points. And again, another team that I'm sure would have been more than happy with a point, but they've come away with 3 points. And, what a great start to the season for them. So, again, going to be interesting. Another new team. Most people might have had sort of them, possibly Blackburn, Palace and Watford as the 4 towards the bottom. But, we sat here and every single one of them's won, won the games barring Watford. So, interesting times for Sunderland. But, I think John was a little bit worried yesterday that maybe 1 or 2 bigger clubs might come calling for their players. So I think that's the thing for me now is keeping that side and again, just sort of add to it in January and sort of see where they're at. But I think good start. And, I think, again, their aims are going to be different to Coventry's come the end of the season. But listen, if Sunderland stay up, then what a great success story that'll be.
Yeah, no, I agree. So what I want to do now is just do a little bit of a breakdown on kind of how Coventry set themselves up and what, for me, was probably the main issue that they experienced. And I think this is how they set themselves up in the first half of the game. I think, like you say, Destiny Toussaint looked threatening down that sort of left-hand side pretty early on. Liv Ferguson too, Nat Johnson was pushing forward. But the issues for me started going into the second half. And that's when they did this. So it became a point when, and this was after Sunderland had scored, so it wasn't like they were sitting back to try and steal a draw. Taking Liv Ferguson off was a strange substitution, I thought. I thought she was the best attacking outlet probably in that first half, seemed to create a lot of chances. But this entire midfield just seemed to just drop back a little bit too much. And obviously what that does is when these players all drop back, I think they were defending on the edge of their box. It just left all of this space in midfield with nothing. And we said at the game that there was nothing linking the attack to the defence. And what this meant is that Rio Hardy had to come out wide to offer to be an outlet. Katie Wilkinson had to drop deep, almost to be on the halfway line. And it just wasn't really anything then that once they got the ball, they couldn't do anything because Sunderland were set back and were happy just to let Katie Wilkinson have the ball on the halfway line because she's not a threat there. She resorted to taking some long shots afterwards, but never really seemed to trouble. I think just because the midfield was so deep. And when this happened, I think one thing I noticed is, and you said it as well, that you wanted the players to have confidence in their own abilities to make the passes. I think there was a time, and I'm going to use Molly Green as an example, and she wasn't the only one. It's just sort of a really clear time that I remember. She had the ball in midfield about here, and she could have played a long ball over the top for Destiny Toussaint to run onto, which then meant obviously Katie Wilkinson could have run forward and got into the box. Rio Hardy could have cut inside and got into the box as well. But instead of sort of taking for that ambitious opportunity to get forward and maybe try and create something, it just seemed as though she went for the safer option. I think at this point, actually, she just went back to Grace Riglar and just made sure that she kept the ball and recycled possession. And for me, that was the issue. There wasn't any real urgency to break the lines and move through the phases. They just seemed happy to keep the ball and control possession, but almost playing as though they're 1-0 up as opposed to 1-0 down. Midfielders playing it to each other. And then Nat Johnson was good. She kind of got forward quite a lot as well. I don't think necessarily Riglar did the same, but they just didn't really seem to have any urgency to move through the phases, to get into that attacking third, to get bodies into the box. And I think they couldn't because they were sat so deep that by the time Wilkinson had the ball or Hardy had the ball out wide, by the time Coventry had got into a threatening position, there was 4, 5, 6 players from Sunderland getting back there to help out. Is there anything that you can think of to add, Tony, of that?
Yeah, just looking at this, I briefly took it off screen then, but I'm going to add it back up. I think what you saw was you got Molly's sort of long ball down the channels. I think not just her, but we saw from the team the last sort of 15, 20 minutes when they did run out of ideas, there was a lot of long balls. But like you were saying, they weren't necessarily long balls in the right area. They'd play like a crossfield ball, like you said, to recycle possession. But yet, by the time that ball got there, everybody shifted across and snuffed it out. And I think just be a bit more braver going forward. And, listen, we talked about this with other teams. Obviously it's game one. There's a lot of new players. It will come after time. We saw last season, didn't we, that it took Leicester a while to get everybody gelled in. And even then sort of they had a tricky November. But I think, overall, there'll be bits that Coventry, I'd say, are quite disappointed with. I think there's quite a bit more that needs to come from them before the challenging. But, they talked about having video analysis, so that'll help them massively. Not all clubs are fortunate to have that in the Championship. So I'm sure, they can correct that and, maybe look at that and think, actually, what, we could have done this better here. We needed to work in more chances. And like you say, just link the midfield to the attack. I think the midfield at times was non-existent. And I heard people shouting, where's the midfield and who's doing this job and who's doing that. And it did look like sort of individual performances in midfield. And that didn't really massively change second half. But credit to Molly when she did come on. I said before on Twitter, she brought like a calmness to midfield. Everybody was less rushed and panicky, and she really broke up play. So hopefully, she starts Sunday.
Yeah, great. I agree. I think they're going to really need to bounce back. So moving on, before we wrap up, we'll go through the National League results. Only going to focus on the Northern Leagues. So the Premier Division North and the Division 1 North. And then we'll have a look at sort of one of the fixtures from next week that I think is particularly interesting. If we start in the Division 1 North, Leeds United beat Alnwick Town 1-0. FC United came from 2-0 down against Barnsley to win 3-2. Bradford City got the win against Chester-le-Street Town. Newcastle United carried on their very strong start to the season with a 3-0 win against Stockport County. And Liverpool Feds, along with Newcastle, one of only 4 teams in the National League with a 100% record, beat Chorley 3-0 at home. Matt, just briefly, do you want to touch on FC United's comeback? And, you were there for the first game of the season with a disappointing result, really, against Newcastle United. But they bounced back now and have won their last 2 games. Do you want to sort of briefly touch on that?
Yeah, I think, obviously Barnsley last year and the year before were right up there near the top. So something must have gone wrong this year. I've not sort of paid attention to Barnsley, but they've not won any games yet. They're rooted to the bottom of the table. Obviously, like you talked about, FC came back to win that. They held on to the win as well. And again, they picked up midweek, just gone, a win as well at home against Bradford. So, listen, I think the first game was disappointing for just everybody involved. Tom said himself he wasn't pleased with how it went. The players weren't pleased. He'd had sort of a bit of bad luck with injuries and things. He's managed to bring in a couple of extra bodies now to help that, experienced players as well. But yeah, I think it's pleasing to see that they managed to, 1, turn it around, and 2, hold on to that lead, because I think it was great they got the win Wednesday and they were fully deserving of that. And I sort of said to Tom, I think once you get that first win and you get a bit of belief in the players and, the confidence comes back, they'll be absolutely fine. And it's a young squad. There's still key players that are injured. I think of Holly Davenport as one of them. But I think overall they'll be happy with that, and they've sort of they've come back, they've held on against, like I say, a team that's been for the last couple of years a very, very sort of handy outfit, and I think now they're sort of sat there, aren't they, in mid-table, and I think now looking, I think we've got this Sunday, I think, is it Alnwick Town they play again, who are down there struggling. They're at home. I'll be back at that one, hopefully. Should be an interesting game. But yeah, again, just pleased for Tom, pleased for the players. I did talk about Holly Davenport. I actually should have mentioned Jordan Bailey as well. Only saw her once, but again, quality player. But yes, looking good. Ella Hartley, I must give a shout out to her, top scorer now. I think we worked out yesterday she was on about 5 goals in 3 games.
Something like that, yeah. Really, really strong.
For that, for somebody that's, predominantly more a midfielder, but can sort of, be an attacking midfielder or potentially a forward, I thought fair play. And yeah, it's starting to come together now. I think, youth and experience mixed. Pre-season was all right. They had some very good results. There was a couple that, didn't go their way in terms of, losses. But that said, the one that sticks out to me was when we talked about the Burnley game and how close they pushed Burnley. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how FC do. New to the league. I think, Tom is obviously aiming high and he's talking about sort of promotion and playoffs and things. I think, he's I suppose he's going to say that. He's not going to come out and say, I'll just be happy with this. But I think from my point of view and what I've seen, I think if they're round about sort of, 5th, 6th, 7th, I wouldn't class that necessarily as, a bad season. But like I say, Tom will tell you different and fair play. He's got every right to do that. But I think for me, like I say, if they can aim for sort of around the upper mid-table, then that'll be, a successful season for them. But, it's football. Who knows?
No, I agree. It's going to be an interesting season for sure. That leads me on quickly to what I want to try and do every week is give a shout out to a National League game in and around the Northwest where I think kind of deserves a little bit of attention for the next week. So for me this week, that is Liverpool Feds away to Leeds United. Feds are my local team. They're just around the corner, and a 100% start to the season is always something that's interesting. And as United fans, we always like to see Leeds United get beat. And given that Feds are absolutely nothing to do with either Liverpool or Everton, we can back them against Leeds United. Now, just briefly to run through the Northern Premier Division results: Derby County beat Burnley 1-0. 2-1 rather, which will inevitably be disappointing for Burnley, who I thought looked a decent side last season. Nottingham Forest thrashed Hull City away 6-0. Huddersfield Town beat Loughborough Lightning 5-1. Middlesbrough beat West Brom 4-1. Sheffield FC beat Stoke City 1-0. And in a top of the table clash, Wolves drew 0-0 with Fylde in what looked to be pretty cagey. So, going into that game, whoever won the game would go top. They've come away, neither of them top of the league, and actually Forest are top on goal difference. I think the National League at the moment is looking like a really, really interesting league. We've got Forest, Wolves, and Fylde now all sat on 10 points after 4 games. So that's definitely going to be something that will be interesting to keep an eye on as the season progresses. Just before we wrap up, each week I'm going to ask a question for you to respond to in the comments, and we'll put this out on Twitter as well. And my question for this week I will read out some tweets and comments next week on the show as well, because we can't be live. I still want to have some kind of interaction with the viewers. I want to know who you think is going to win the championship and who you think is going to win the WSL. So, Matt, before we wrap up, I'll ask, who do you think those 2 teams are going to be?
WSL, I'm going to say Chelsea, and championship, I'm going to stick with Coventry. I said Coventry, and I think they're for me, when they get playing and they get everybody firing together, I think they've got more goals in the team than maybe Liverpool have. So, yeah, I think I'm going to go Cov and Chelsea for me.
I agree. They were the 2 that I thought I said on Twitter beforehand, and not going to change my mind now. Thank you, everybody, for joining us in this first weekly wrap-up show. A little bit longer than I think we would like to do, but bear with us while we kind of figure out the format and how long to spend on each thing. But make sure you tune in next week for what is bound to be an exciting first weekend of action from the WSL in front of the Sky cameras.